I speak now as the wind once did, sweeping across the northern coasts where ice and fire forged a people known to the world as Vikings. But before the raiding, before the long ships kissed foreign shores, there was a world veiled in rites, in whispers of flesh and spirit, in ancient rituals where the cycle of life was not merely celebrated, it was summoned. In the shadow of the fjords, where the light of spring pierced the long shroud of winter, Norse communities gathered for a ceremony that echoed through the bones of the earth. It was not war they prepared for, but fertility, a sacred convergence of flesh and myth, the kind spoken of only in hushed voices or through trembling sagas scratched into wood and stone. These were not mere festivals, but awakenings, primal, deliberate, and steeped in spiritual terror. The festival began at dusk, as the final winter frost melted into the moss. A long wooden pole, the frigostalpi, or fertility post, was raised at the center of the village, carved with runes that whispered names of the Vanir gods, Jord, Freyr, and Freya. It stood as a spine connecting Midgard, the realm of man, to Vanaheim, the home of ancient fertility spirits. Around it, the earth had been tilled not for crops, but for blood. Women anointed with goat's milk and honey danced barefoot in a spiral, their bodies smeared with the reddish ochre of crushed berries and boar's blood. Their voices sang an ancient chant, one no longer understood by tongue but remembered by flesh, passed down by mothers who had bled beneath these same stones. They called upon Freya, the lustful goddess, whose chariot of cats heralded abundance and unrelenting desire. It was then that the Jorulfr, or seed-bearer, emerged, a man chosen not by vote, but by omen. He was tall, painted in sacred ash, his loins adorned with strands of woven flax. For a season he had been kept apart from the others, fed only roots and mead infused with elk antler powder. His dreams were recorded by the Valva, the seeress, who claimed the gods had whispered to him truths about the coming harvest and which wombs would ripen. The rite demanded union, not in secrecy, but in public. Witnessed by all, the Jorulfr and the chosen women, usually 3, symbolizing the Norns who spun the fate of all, would engage in what they called singver, or the song of weaving. Bodies locked in rhythm as the crowd chanted, not out of lust, but reverence. Every gasp, every cry, was seen as an offering to the fields, to the forests, to the womb of the world. I must stress, this was not debauchery. It was devotion. Yet even here, within the fires of sacred ritual, there lingered shadows. There were murmurs, always murmurs, that some of these rites served more than the fields. That in certain villages, those deeper inland or farther north where winter bit hardest, the rituals had turned darker, bloodier. That children born of these rites were sometimes marked, eyes too wide, teeth emerging too early. They said these were not Freya's gifts, but Loki's jokes, tainted, cursed. I heard tales of a village called Holmfir, where no crops grew unless the chosen woman was buried alive in the field the morning after the rite. Some claimed it was myth. Others swore the skulls could still be found beneath the barley. And the most chilling of all, a ritual called Natfamr, the night embrace, where the seed-bearer would lie not with the living, but with a recently deceased virgin, preserved in ice. A gesture, they said, to bridge life and death, to fool hell herself into releasing the spirits of the dead. But I digress. These were the secrets, the rot beneath the fertile earth. Most of the time, the rituals were as pure as belief allowed. Yet every faith has its fractures, and every story its shadow. As the flames grew high and the chants reached their crescendo, the villagers would cast tokens into the fire. Locks of hair, carvings of phallic gods, dried flowers, drops of menstrual blood. All was sacred. All was consumed. The fire, it was believed, judged what it did not accept would not burn. And what did not burn cursed the bearer. When dawn rose, and the mist coiled around the mountains, the fertility pole would be pulled down and chopped into 7 pieces. These pieces were buried in different places: the barn, the hearth, the forest, the well, the boundary stone, the child's cradle, and one, always one, thrown into the sea, to remind the gods that man and nature were one, and that their pact had been sealed with sweat, with sex, and sometimes with silence. I have walked those lands. I have seen the places where these ceremonies occurred, now overgrown, now forgotten. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear you can still hear the echo of the spiral dance. Or see something. A shimmer of skin between trees, a whisper that is not wind. This was only the beginning. For the deeper I delved into the rites of Norse fertility, the more I uncovered a truth that the elders had tried to bury. A secret guarded by fire, ash, and fear. What if these rituals were not purely Norse at all? What if they had been inherited or stolen? But that, I fear, is a story for another night. I return now to the whispering past, not to comfort you, but to reveal what was hidden beneath the sacred stones and splintered altars. For while the rites of fertility dazzled the eye and bewitched the flesh, something else stirred beneath the skin of this world. Something colder than the fjords and more calculating than the gods. What I am about to reveal did not come from stories told by drunken skalds or from carved runes at burial mounds. It came from records, not Norse, but Frankish, found in the monastery of St. Gillis, scorched by Viking hands in the year 858. In a cellar untouched by flame, a scroll bound in deer hide, marked with the seal of the Carolingian court, detailed interrogations of a monk taken captive during a raid on the southern coast. The monk claimed he had lived among the Norse for over 3 winters, as a slave inscribed to a chieftain named Eiríkur Blaga, Eric Blood-Eye. The scroll's contents were considered heretical and were hidden even from the eyes of the church, for it spoke not just of raiding or heathen blasphemy, but of a cult, ancient even among the Norse, that had infected their rites of fertility with something far more sinister. The cult had no name in the monk's tongue, but he recorded its whispered Norse name, Natlifsglada, which he translated as the gleam of night's life. A poetic title, but one which concealed its rot. The cult operated within the fertility rites, not beside them but inside them. It was a parasite of devotion. At first glance, all appeared sacred and traditional. The dances, the chanting, the symbolic unions. But when the crowd dispersed and the sacred fires dimmed, another gathering occurred, one not witnessed by the common folk. A second rite, a hidden rite. The monk described how the high-ranking seeress of Eirikir's clan, a woman named Solveig, would lead a select few, masked in elk bone and shrouded in black wool, into the forest long after the public ceremony had ended. There, in a stone circle thought to predate the Norse settlers themselves, they would conduct what he called Blomodr, the Blood Mother's offering. The purpose of this rite was not fertility, not in the way the people believed. It was sacrifice. The monk wrote of a girl, no older than 12, chosen not for her body's readiness to bear life, but for her innocence, her unspoiled blood. She was kept pure, untouched, and silent from the moment of her selection, never spoken to except in prayers. And on the night of the hidden rite, she was stripped, painted in runes with fermented mare's milk and crushed elderberry, and laid across a slab of stone. Her wrists were not bound. She did not scream. She had been raised to believe this was glory. As the cult's members chanted in an old tongue, not Norse, not Latin, but something lost, Solveig would press a blackthorn needle into the girl's forehead. Then came the invocation. Not to Freya or Freyr, but to Ymir, the primordial being, the first giant born from ice and fire, whose dismembered body was said to have formed the world. But in this ritual, Ymir was not revered as a progenitor, he was summoned as a judge. The monk claimed the cult believed that Ymir was not dead, but dreaming, and through sacrifice, they could awaken a fragment of his dream to influence fate, to manipulate harvests, to bring ruin to rival clans, to twist the future like a branch under snow. What made this truly terrifying was that Eirikr, the chieftain, had known. He had sanctioned it. In fact, he had depended on it. His rise in power, his sudden wealth, his inexplicable victories in raids. All of it coincided with the years the cult was most active. You may ask, how could such rituals remain hidden? In a world where clans gathered and stories spread like wildfire? The answer lies in fear, not of death, but of social annihilation. Anyone who dared question the legitimacy of the fertility rites risked being branded Galdremen, witches or seer practitioners of the forbidden kind. In Norse culture, for a man to be accused of seer was to be accused of unmanliness, of sorcery, of perversion. Women who practiced outside sanctioned rites were called nyingskona, shamed witches, marked for exile or worse. No one challenged the cult because no one survived the accusation that followed. Still, there were rumors of resistance. A lone vulva, a seeress from the outer islands, had once tried to expose the bloodmother rite. Her name was Ursa, and her voice was said to carry through storms. She claimed she had spoken with the spirit of the sacrificed child, and that the child's soul was not at rest. Ursa was last seen boarding a Nar bound for Iceland. The ship never reached its destination. Fishermen later found its mast floating off the coast, wrapped in a black woolen shroud. What disturbed me most was not the ritual itself, but the spread of its influence. The monk described how members of the cult had traveled, posing as traders, as poets, as wanderers. Carrying with them fragments of the dark rite, they planted it like a seed in other Norse settlements. Orkney, the Isle of Man, the northern coasts of Ireland. Wherever fertility rites flourished, the cult found a way to embed itself beneath the celebration. They were architects of shadow, feeding on belief, masked by tradition. And yet, there was more. The final paragraph of the scroll, smudged and nearly unreadable, hinted at something deeper. A relic. A physical object at the center of the cult's power. Described only as kvirskr, the womb stone. Said to be smooth as bone, warm to the touch even in winter, and marked with runes no one alive could translate. It was believed to have fallen from the sky, or been unearthed from a burial mound older than men. They worshipped it. They fed it. This, I believe, is where the truth of the cult slips from mere manipulation into the realm of terror. What if it was not merely belief that fueled the gleam of night's life, but something older, something watching? You may think you understand Viking fertility rites. You may picture fire, dance, and sacred union beneath the northern lights. But I have seen what lies beneath the altar, and the stone remembers. I speak now of origins, of things born not from gods nor man, but from the void between. The rituals of the Vikings, however drenched in firelight and faith, were but masks, elaborate disguises sewn from flesh and myth to conceal something far more ancient. I have traced the line, and it does not end in Scandinavia. It begins there. Let me take you back, not to the age of Vikings, but to the time before ships kissed the sea, before even Odin's name was spoken beneath the stars. The womb stone, the kvirskr, was not Norse. Of that I am certain. It is said to have emerged from the soil of Gotland, a lonely island in the Baltic, known for its strange burial mounds and stone circles that predate the Viking era by centuries. Farmers who uncovered it did not recognize it as a relic. They believed it was a god. Smooth as ivory, marked with deep black grooves that seemed to pulse when touched, the object was unlike anything known to the Norse. It hummed in the night. It warmed the air around it even in frost. And when placed near a woman, it was said her monthly cycle would begin early, or cease entirely. The cult, the gleam of night's life, did not find the stone. The stone found them. It called to the old seeresses in dreams. Visions of deep forests where flesh bloomed from trees, and lakes where children with too many fingers whispered from beneath the water. The women came in secret. They built the first circle. They laid the first offering. From that moment on, the fertility rites changed. The outer ceremonies, the dancing, the sacred unions, the chanting to Freyr and Freya, remained untouched. That was the genius of the cult. Their heresy was invisible. But within the circle, beneath the earth, the true work began. The womb stone required more than blood. It required legacy. And so they bred for it carefully, obsessively. The most beautiful, the strongest, those born beneath specific constellations. Those whose births came during storms or eclipses. They were paired, over generations, in a breeding line designed not to serve gods, but to awaken something. I found fragments of their blood ledger, a kind of genealogy scroll wrapped in calfskin and hidden beneath the ruins of an old longhouse in Trondelag. Names crossed out, others underlined, symbols beside them, double spirals, eyes with no pupils, serpents biting their own tails. One name repeated often, Bjarnhildr the Twice-Born. She was born dead, or so the midwives thought. No breath, no cry. Her mother screamed in despair. They laid the cold infant on the hearthstone, preparing her for the flames. But as the fire was stoked, she coughed, once, and then screamed. Not like a babe, but like a woman. The Volva claimed the wombstone had intervened. That Bjarnhildr was its chosen vessel. She was raised in isolation, surrounded by carvings and crows, taught not to speak except during ritual. By age 10, she could recite the 9 names of hell backward. By 12, she performed her first sacrifice. But what made Bjarnhildr infamous, what turned her name into a curse, was not her rituals. It was her children. She birthed 7 in her lifetime, each to a different man, each chosen by the cult for specific traits. A spearman's height, a skald's voice, a berserker's rage. But none of the children were right. Some were born without eyes, others with no mouths. One boy, they said, was born with skin so pale it appeared translucent, his veins like rivers of ink. And yet Bjarnhildr loved them, all of them. She kept them in a cave near the sea, fed them fish and honey, taught them to never fear the dark. She called them her stars. But the cult, disappointed by the imperfections, took them, one by one, into the forest. Only one returned. His name was Kjalakr. He bore no deformity. In fact, he was perfect, too perfect. His eyes never blinked. His skin never bruised. By 5 he could speak 3 tongues. By 10 he had memorized the runatal, the secret runes of Odin, without ever being taught. He was the cult's triumph. They believed he was the final vessel, the one who would awaken the dreaming god beneath the stone. But something went wrong. On the night of his 13th winter, Kjalakr entered the stone circle for the final rite. The wombstone was placed before him. A girl, also 13, was laid beside it. They were told to join to consummate the bloodline. What happened next was not recorded in full, but the fragments suggest that Kjalakr did not obey. He screamed, a sound so piercing that wolves howled across 3 fjords. The wombstone cracked. The girl began to bleed from her eyes. The ground beneath them turned black, as if burned from within. And then Kjalakr vanished. Some said he had become light and disappeared. Others claimed he fled, ashamed, and drowned himself. But Bjarnhildr swore he had been taken, that the stone had rejected him not because he was impure, but because something else had already claimed him. After that night, the cult crumbled. Its leaders were found dead in their sleep. The stone was buried or lost or taken, no one knows. The fertility rites returned to normalcy. The Volvas who remained rewrote the chants, scrubbed the names. And history, like always, forgot. But I have not forgotten. I have traced the bloodlines. I have followed the fragments. I believe the descendants of Bjarnhildr still walk among us, unknowing, untouched, awaiting the call. And if the wombstone still exists, it will call again. This is not merely history. It is prophecy. The past, I once believed, was silent, that it slept beneath the dust of burned villages and shattered altars. But I was wrong. History is not silent, it waits. It was in the archives of Uppsala, beneath the shadow of the great cathedral built over pagan bones, that I first laid eyes on the Blurnaskr, the Blood Rune Codex. It had no catalog number. No scholar had claimed it. Wrapped in sealskin and bound with rusted iron clasps, it was handed to me by an old archivist who whispered, "This is not for printing." The codex had been found beneath a collapsed farmhouse in Jämtland, unearthed during foundation work. Its pages, made of treated wolf hide, reeked of smoke and musk. The runes etched into them were not elder Futhark, nor younger Futhark. They belonged to something older, what the archivist called Galdrunner, or sorcerer's runes. Few dared translate them. Fewer survived the attempt. But I knew what I was reading. This was no mere mythological text. This was instruction. The first section was a litany of warnings. Not to read aloud after sundown. Not to study near running water. Not to copy certain runes lest they burn the hand of the scribe. At first, I took these as superstition. But then I came to the section titled, the seed that dreams in stone. And there, among curling diagrams and blood circle sketches, was the unmistakable shape of the wombstone. The codex confirmed what the monk scrolls and village legends had only hinted at, that the stone was not merely a relic or a tool of the cult, but a living vessel grown not from earth, but from elsewhere. It did not serve the gods of Norsemen. It had no allegiance to Asgard or Vanaheim. It was part of something older than Yggdrasil. It fed not on belief but on potential. The runes described the stone as Andarnir, the new spirit, a misnomer. It was not new. It was merely new here. What chilled me most was not the stone's origin, but its purpose. The text described an ancient goal of the cult, long suppressed by later generations. The creation of a drombarn, a dream child, not born of man or woman but of ritual, conceived through the perfect harmony of bloodlines and bound by runes. This child, if born, would become a bridge, a living conduit between this world and the realm of sleeping giants. Not metaphorical giants, not the poetic beings of Eddic verse, but actual slumbering entities sealed beneath earth, ice, and sea. The child would be their eye, their breath, their key. The cult had tried for centuries to bring forth this child. Each failure, each monstrous birth, each madness, each disappearance, had not discouraged them, but refined their method. Gjallakr, the vanished boy, was not a failure to them. He was a lesson, and the Blood Rune Codex recorded exactly how they planned to try again. I was not the first to read this. Scrawled in the margins were notes in a much newer hand, 19th century, by the ink and script. It belonged to a man named Anders Loken, a Lutheran priest turned folklorist, who had spent years traveling the fjords collecting old sagas. In 1882 he wrote, "The wombstone is real. The line is unbroken. I found her. She does not know what she carries." He left no location. Only a single phrase, repeated 3 times, "Born beneath Skogshorn." Skogshorn is a mountain in southern Norway. Remote, untamed. I went there. What I found was not a village, but a compound. Nestled in a glacial valley was a collection of turf-roof houses surrounded by runic stones. No road led to it. The inhabitants, perhaps 20, perhaps more, wore woolen cloaks and spoke in a dialect I could barely recognize. They called themselves Etterfalgjern, the followers. When I asked what they followed, an old woman with clouded eyes smiled and said, "We tend the cradle." She led me to a small stone cabin. Inside was a girl, maybe 17, pale, still. She sat weaving threads in complete silence, lips moving without sound. Around her neck hung a pendant, a shard of smooth white stone, warm to the touch. I asked her name. She whispered, "I am not named. I am prepared." Prepared. The word echoed in me like a death bell. These people were not relics of a forgotten past. They were the living continuation of the cult, reborn, renamed, but unwavering in purpose. The rituals had evolved. They no longer relied on public fertility rites. They used genetics, symbolism, and seclusion. The wombstone, or a fragment of it, had survived, and it had chosen again. I left that place at dusk. They allowed me to go, perhaps because they thought I would not be believed. Perhaps because they knew it did not matter. The girl's time was close. That much was clear. When I returned to Uppsala, I found the codex gone. The archivist dead. Heart failure, they said. But the sealskin bundle had been burned. Not just destroyed, but ritually consumed. The room smelled of iron and crushed mint. A warning. And then the dreams began. I see forests where the trees grow upside down. Lakes that boil beneath the moon. Children with mouths full of salt whispering my name. I know now that the past is not past. The rites of the Vikings were not the seed. They were the blossom of something older, something that never truly went away. And it is awakening. The dream child is coming. There is a silence that precedes catastrophe. Not peace, not stillness, but the breathless hush before the scream. That silence now cloaks the world, though most do not hear it. I hear it, because I know what is coming. And I know it is already too late. Let me tell you what happened. 2 months after I returned from the valley beneath Skogshorn, reports began to emerge. Strange weather patterns, sudden animal migrations, a sequence of low tremors in southern Norway, always occurring at the same time. 2:47 a.m. The media brushed it off. Localized seismic fluctuations. But I knew. I felt it in my marrow. The womb stone, or what remains of it, was stirring again. The birth was near. I tried to warn people. Academics, journalists, even the Norwegian government. I showed them the codex fragments, the records, the photographs of the girl and her pendant. Some listened. Most laughed. One man, a folklorist from Bergen, said to me, "You've let your myths consume you. There is no such thing as a dream child. But I know what I saw in that cabin. And I know what I read in the Blood Rune Codex. The Drombarn is not a metaphor. It is a vessel, a bridge, a mouth. And now, it has spoken." The final ritual, the night of convergence, took place on the summer solstice. In the dead of the night, under the full eye of the midnight sun, the followers gathered in silence around the stone circle at Skogshorn. No fire was lit. No voice was raised. Only one sound was heard, a hum, not made by mouths, but by the earth itself. A vibration, low, relentless. At the center stood the girl, her name still unknown. She had ceased speaking weeks prior, not out of fear, out of transformation. She had begun to change. Her skin, they say, took on a pale luminescence. Her breath no longer steamed in the cold. She slept with her eyes open and no longer bled when cut. She was not becoming a god. She was becoming a door. At exactly 2:47 a.m., she fell to her knees, clutching the shard of the wombstone. The earth trembled. The stone cracked again. And then the scream. Not hers. Something else. A sound that rolled across the mountains like thunder, but carried no echo. A scream that vibrated through bone. Those nearby described visions. Impossible, blasphemous visions. Trees bleeding milk, infants speaking in reversed language, a sky that folded inward. They called it the unveiling. And in that moment the girl, the dream child, collapsed. Not dead, not asleep, but silent. The followers called it success. The bloodline had completed its purpose. The wombstone had awakened. The eye was open, but it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, strange phenomena spread. Across Scandinavia at first, but then beyond. Cattle born without eyes. Frost in midsummer. Children waking from night terrors and speaking runes they could not have known. A fisherman in Lofoten hanged himself after claiming, "The mountain is breathing." And then came the dream. Not just mine, everyone's. Millions across Europe reported the same vision. A vast plain of ice beneath a sunless sky. A single, towering shape in the distance. And a voice, or something like a voice, whispering not in language but in rhythm. A beat, pattern, a call. What lies beneath us is not dead. It was dreaming. And now, through her, through the dream child, it is listening. We do not know its name. Not truly. The runes only approximate it. But they all agree on one meaning. That which waits beneath. I have gone into hiding now. Not out of fear for my life, but fear that I, too, may be part of the chain. That by reading, by knowing, I have become a node in its awakening. It no longer needs the cult. It no longer needs ritual. It is awake. And like all newborns, it hungers. Governments will deny it. Churches will suppress it. Scientists will rationalize it. But the signs are there, in the trembling of roots, in the cracks of old stones, in the dreams of children. The Vikings did not create this horror. They merely tried to contain it through rites, through blood, through fire. They gave it shape so they could bind it. But it cannot be bound forever. And now the shape has broken. The dream child breathes, and every breath is a countdown. I do not know what happens next. I only know this: when you dream of the frozen plain, do not walk toward the shape. Do not answer the voice. Do not speak its name even if it tells you, because the moment you do, it sees you, and once it sees you, you are no longer yours.